The Sam Sorbo Show is brought to you in partnership by the Herzog Foundation.
Hi there. My guest today leads one of the most influential organizations in classical Christian education, with decades of experience as a teacher, a school leader, and a national voice. He is shaping a generation rooted in truth, virtue, and a biblical worldview. That's what's up next on the Sam Sorbo Show. Here we go.
Sam, welcome back to the program.
I'm glad to welcome Sam Sorbo.
It's great to have you here.
Well, welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. So he's not only just a leader, as if that was not enough. He's not just a leader in education reform. He's also a mentor to school leaders. He's a visionary strategist. He's a tireless advocate for Christ-centered learning. Is there any other? Under his guidance, the Society for Classical Learning is building a vibrant network of educators who are committed to cultivating wisdom and virtue in the next generation. Here to share his insights, his journey, and why this movement matters now more than ever is Eric Cook. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sam. Honored to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you. And we just want to know everything about what you're doing. Full disclosure, I home educated all three of my children classically through the program Classical Conversations. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is galvanizing schools to teach classically. And so I'd love to dive into what the differences are between those two things.
Sure. Yeah, so classical Christian education really focuses on the cultivation of wisdom and virtue as the aim of education. And I think that's really important to start with because there's a lot of ways that our movement can get pretty academic and erudite about nuancing and parsing out the definitions and so forth. But if we just start with what is this really about? Why do we educate children at all? Then that's where we've gone terribly wrong with education in the United States. And what we've primarily focused on since the Industrial Revolution is about equipping children for the workforce. And we've lost preparation for life. So
we've lost wisdom.
Exactly.
We've lost discernment. This is one of the things that I harp on is we've completely lost discernment. We are not teaching children to discern in our schools. We're teaching them not to discern because that's discrimination, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And so what does that even mean, right? If we're talking about wisdom, how do we even teach that to children? And how would the public schools begin to do that? Those are serious questions that every parent should take seriously.
Do you think public schools can teach wisdom? Could?
Yes, I think they can teach a wisdom from the tradition that is accessible to everyone. I think they ought to be doing it. I think they must be doing that. So, for example, if you go into a lot of classical charter schools that don't have Christian content to what they're doing, right? But they teach the great texts. They ask the great questions of what it means to be a human being, of what is truth, what's good, what's beautiful. And then they access the best of what's been said and thought about those questions of ultimate significance. That's very different from what's being done today. Learning how to read a great text, learning how to even think and to discern, right? Truth from error, and being able to think critically, to think rationally.
Okay, I want to get into that with you, but I have to tell the audience. So I'm reading a Charles Dickens novel, and I came upon a sentence that was this long, like it was 8 lines of page long, small text. So all kinds of phrases and the sentence structure was like, to diagram that sentence would have been out the wazoo. It can be done because it was perfectly grammatically correct. At the end of it, I literally knew what I had read, but I had to go back and read it again because it was so delicately and poetically phrased to work together. And when you say to be able to read the great texts, and there are great texts, right? There are less great texts. And so it takes some discernment to know the difference. But in our schools, we're giving them factoids.
Right.
We're not even giving them texts, as you would put it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's dribble is what we're giving children. It's not even humane what we're doing to children in our schools. And I think, once you lose the focus of why we're doing this and turn it into something entirely different, beyond even just job training, indoctrination, and other sort of ulterior motives that come into what education has become, we've seen the results. You see it everywhere. There's no argument even to be made about how devastating the public education system has become in the US. I actually think that is a significant reason why our movement has begun to flourish and grow exponentially, is because in the backdrop of what's available to families, they, like you as a parent, look at, surely this is not the thing that I'm going to subject my children to. Surely this is not what's available to me and what's going to lead to my child's flourishing as a human being. It can't be. And so when you start asking, then how should I, or how will I educate my child? I think you start wrestling with some really fundamental questions. And, when we start out at 5 years old, we have to think about the end. When they're 18 and they leave us, what is most important that they need to be able to do? I would talk about this all the time with incoming kindergarten moms who are driving the decisions on their child's education. And 80% of the things that, are most important in life, you have no obvious answer to. There's no prescription. There's no rules about who you marry, what you invest in, how you deal with suffering. Those things have to be discerned. They have to be understood in light of wisdom. And if you've never engaged those whatsoever, how do you navigate life in a way that leads to good and human flourishing? How do you love your neighbor through these things if you've never even asked the questions that are fundamental to who we are? It's tragic.
What's the response of the kindergarten moms? Like what?
So there's been an ongoing theme, I think, in the classical Christian movement, which is, a level of resonance, I would say, because they aren't necessarily things that they have thought about as parents. Most of our families have not been educated this way themselves. And so they may not have thought about it this way, but once you articulate it, it really resonates with them. Yes, that's what I want for my child. I'll tell you this, I was the head of school at Covenant Classical in Fort Worth, Texas for 13 years. And the second half of my years there, almost every single parent that we would tour from beginning to end would apply, almost every single one, because they saw that something was possible that they didn't even know existed. And they saw kids who were joyful, who were engaged, and as they made their way into the upper school, who were thoughtful and articulate and respectful, and they were blown away.
Why do you think the few who did not apply, why do you think that was?
Usually they were outliers. There was some philosophical reason, or they maybe were not as a devoted believer, perhaps. I'm not, those aren't the only reasons. There's a lot of different reasons. They could have had other schools that they were looking at that they felt like it was a better fit, because there is a level of commitment you have to have about this type of formation, and both the Christian and the classical part of it. And so you have to count the costs in that. And
what is that cost? Just for people watching, like, in fact, we should probably start with, like, what does the Society for Classical Learning do as opposed to the school that you ran, and then go back and pick up that other question, like, what's the cost?
So our organization exists to foster human flourishing by making classical Christian education thrive. So what that means is we want all 1,000 plus classical Christian schools in the US, and now dozens of countries outside the US, to be around for generations. We want them to have strong leadership. We want them to have, a sound financial model. We want them to have a really sound, articulate curriculum. We want them to have really good teacher training. So we offer a whole host of resources to help them do that. We're also growing the number of classical Christian schools. We're trying to exponentially in the United States by creating a $60 million growth fund that would help some of these established classical Christian schools create networks they can replicate and make this more accessible to more and more families. And we're trying to publicly advocate, just like we're doing here, for this type of education more broadly. We want people to have access and experience this, because so few do.
Right. Okay, so we understand what your organization is about, but now let's go back to the parents who tour the school. They see children who are engaged, children who are involved in the discussion and willing to have the discussion and encouraging others to have the discussion, right? Of wrestling with the big questions of life. And you mentioned that there is an investment on the side of the parents, which, our culture tells us you can have it all. In other words, you can have a baby and go right back to work, and somebody else can take care of the baby. And there's no loss to you when someone else takes care of your baby, which of course I preach the absolute opposite.
Right.
But there is a cost for you, an investment that is necessary in the raising of your child, even when you send them to school, which is not accounted for in our culture. Most parents, and I was one of them, you drop your kid off at school, you think, okay, delegated,
Right.
they're taking care of that, and I can go do my own thing now. But your schools don't encourage that idea, right?
No, we don't. I mean, first of all, it's about framing the relationship between the school and the parents. And what we say is every parent is responsible before God to raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That is a charge to families. That is a charge to parents. It is not a charge to schools. Actually, school doesn't show up in the Bible. So we're an extension of the parents' responsibilities to help them execute their God-given responsibilities.
Right.
And we make that very clear up front. Now, that doesn't mean that parents can show up at any time and start dictating everything that happens within the walls of the school, but it frames the relationship in very important ways that puts the responsibility on parents to exercise that very important responsibility. So that also means that we need to be completely aligned in terms of the vision and the outcomes of what we're trying to do with your children. So we have a portrait of a graduate, which is 8 characteristics that we want every child who graduates from the school to exemplify. And it's simple things. And none of them have to do with college or becoming a star baseball player or something like that. Love God, love your neighbor, reason wisely, engage the culture with a Christ-centered worldview, embody virtue. And there's one other, and I can't think of it. So every school that in our network has this portrait of a graduate, which is, again, our ideal. If we've done all this right, then these are the kind of kids that will be coming out of this.
Okay, so you actually have a corporate vision for your schools, and they must ascribe to this vision for their students in order to be part of your organization.
Well, to be clear, every individual school has a portrait of a graduate. They're not all the same things, but they're very close.
Okay, so the portrait that you just painted for me was for the school that you led?
Correct. Yes, at Covenant and
And so they differ. And in fact, I would encourage every parent, when you're looking at schools, interview the principal, the headmaster, whoever's sort of at the top, and say, what is your vision for your graduates? What are they aspiring to? And many schools will tell you, well, our graduates go to Harvard, they go to Yale. Like, their vision for students is that they get into good colleges, which is not a sustainable vision. Can I say it that way? I'm not sure how else to say it. It's certainly not child honoring.
Well, I think it just aims way too low for what we're trying to do in education. Wisdom and virtue are things that endure for a lifetime. You don't do 13 years of school.
It's too low. It's
right.
They don't have any sort of respect for the character of the individual. They're just looking at the individual as a pawn. You're going to be here and then you're going to go there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what happens is we get locked in a system where we're orienting the entire 13 years of K-12 education for a 4-year experience in college. It doesn't make any sense.
I agree.
Yeah. So we want to form affections, habits, skills, character that endures for a lifetime, whether they go to college or not.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, we're going to take a quick break. And after the break, I'm going to ask you, how you get parents involved in that, because the culture tells them that they can just drop off and move on with their lives. And how do you fix that sort of mindset? And if you've ever had to have a chat with parents, we're going to talk about that. Also, how classical Christian education can contribute to the broader cultural issues that we're discussing today. So we will be right back. This is the Sam Sorbo Show, and my guest is Eric Cook. He is the head of the Society for Classical Education and Schools, and we will be right back. So stay tuned after these messages. Thanks for tuning into the Sam Sorbo Show. You know, we are in a battle for our very nation, a nation that was founded on Christian principles and on the Bible. The 10 Commandments is the basis for our rule of law. But these days, when you go talk to people on the street, you'll find that most of them don't even know what rule of law means. And that's why I'm so proud to have Herzog Foundation as a sponsor of my show. I also love what they do because they seek for the benefit of Christian education throughout the nation. So Herzog Foundation is a wonderful partner for us here at the Sam Sorbo Show. Thanks for watching. Protect your family from harmful and explicit content online with Canopy, the only solution that filters and monitors in real time. With Canopy, you can rest easy knowing your children are browsing safely and securely. Visit canopy.us and use code SAM20 to get 20% lifetime discount on any subscription. Keep your loved ones safe online with Canopy today. Okay, so welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. My guest is Eric Cook. He is from the Society for Classical Learning, which encompasses the schools and the whole pedagogy of classical education and its implementation. And so we left off, I wanted to know, because we've gotten so far away from a good working definition of education, which is how you started this podcast, frankly, which I love, is listen, when we talk about the education of children, what we are talking about is instilling wisdom and integrity or virtue. I think you use the word virtue. I use the word integrity, character. I don't believe that you can effectively academically educate a child without addressing character first, because academics are not that interesting unless the character is there. I mean, they're somewhat interesting, but when the going gets tough, the character's got to carry the child, right? And so you just start the conversation right there. We are not about data entry, which is what the schools talk about. Basically, we're going to get your child into college. Classical education is about character formation in the child, and allowing them to practice discernment and accrue wisdom, so that when they are unleashed into the real world, they have the tools to make decisions, good decisions that won't be long-term hurt for them, right? So parents are not, can I say most parents just aren't savvy to that? We all went K through 12. So we all think that education is data entry. We were all convinced that, and that's why the parents that go to you are the same parents that go, okay, I don't like what's happening in the public school, but I can't homeschool because I know that I wasn't taught anything. I didn't learn anything in school, right? But if I go to you, your guys, right? You as a corporation, then at least my child might get wisdom. And so for them, it's not so much a cultural shift. It's just you're the solution to the tip of the iceberg of the problem that they are seeing, right? How do you address that and get them on board with the whole iceberg that you're?
That's a great
bad
question.
Analogy, but the whole shit.
Yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, you got to be patient because everybody's on a learning curve, right, of figuring out what this is. And if you think about however they articulate it, what they really want for their child is what a classical Christian education provides. It really is, because everybody wants their child to be wise and virtuous. What parent would say, no, you know what, that's actually not that interesting to me as a parent. That's not a priority for me. No, it's not. That's not the case. Now, you might say, how do you do that? What is the means by which a person is formed in this way? Because make no mistake, every educational model forms the character of children. And it has certain philosophical presuppositions that are guiding that work. So when you say data entry,
can we say that every school experience is indoctrination?
in a sense it is, because if you say, for example, that human beings are, information processors, and that they're, biological machines, and what we need them to do is economic output. So we need to develop a certain skill, so they'll do a certain, produce a certain thing for society, which is, again, wrapping this all around a job training. Then you formed a whole education model around that. So why would you read Latin and Greek? Why would you spend time with great texts? You're just going to make this as utilitarian as you can. So what I always say is, John Adams has this great quote. I use it all the time. He says there are two types of education. One teaches you how to make a living, the other how to live. And really that's what it's about. So when you reframe it that way, then you're very selective about what is the content of the curriculum that's going to shape a wise and virtuous human being. Right? That if you start with a why,
come on, the classical curriculum is intimidating. I mean, I remember reading the Odyssey in high school, and it was awful. It was a slog fest, right? And so when we hit upon it in our curriculum, I was like, quietly to myself, I would never do this to my kids because they had to read it. But I was like, oh. But so what I'm getting at is the parents look at your curriculum and they're like quivering in their boots. They're like, oh God, that's just a lot. That's onerous. It's a lot. But I like their vision for my kid. So he's going to go there and I'm going to buy in because I have to buy in order to send him there. But you need them more than just buying in. You need them actually to board the ship and to travel with you, right?
Yes. Yeah. So what we have to do is be patient, because we do want parents to learn to love the things that they're teaching their children. Because if it's just one-sided and you send them to the school and you think, all right, go do it because there's no way I can do it. We want to bridge that gap as much as possible. We want parents to understand, what is this really about? And not only is it just good for my child, it's good for human beings in general, to read deeply, to think deeply, to engage in big ideas, a great conversation. They should be doing that too. So we want to help them, bring them into that, and let them, as they can, engage with the type of learning that their children are. And what's really fascinating, you get a lot of converts from the families who will watch their fourth grader, fifth grader go through and watch them learn to love it and learn how to master hard texts. I mean, the distance between a hard text that you have that reaction to and loving it as a great teacher. And that's the most important thing, in fact, in our schools. It's finding the right human being who embodies the things that we want in that portrait of a graduate.
That's student screening, right? So you have student screening because I'm sure you have more applicants than positions in the school. How do you screen the teachers? Did your teachers go to teaching colleges?
Hopefully not. No, quite a few of them do, but there's a lot of unlearning because, we've developed our own, programs that are available to a lot of teachers who are going in the classical Christian world. But what typically
programs of what?
Master's programs for people who want to learn how to teach classically, and undergraduate programs for that matter. So for example, you'll see a lot of our schools go to Hillsdale and just recruit the heck out of all the kids come out of there, whether they have a teaching degree or not, because it's a certain kind of person that you're looking for. Yes, they need to have certain content mastered, but they need to be a certain kind of person. If they do that, the rest is downstream of what you want them to do as a teacher. They love the right things. They can think well, read well, engage people well. We put way too much stock in these credentialing programs that
agreed.
Yeah.
Trust the experts.
Yeah.
That didn't work out well for us the last go around. So
no, sure didn't.
I don't know why we're still putting faith in experts. Yeah. Have you, in your experience with the school that you led, did you have families that were ever asked to leave because they were not ascribing as well as you would hope that they would?
Very rarely did we have to do that. And most of the time, we had families who were very grateful, highly motivated, very engaged as partners with the school, and helped contribute to building and growing the school. You know, when I got at the school, we had 180 kids. And when I left, we had almost 500 kids. And that doesn't happen without an entire school community who's committed to growing it. And so many of those families rolled up their sleeves, did the hard things, gave money, built buildings, you know, to make sure that it would last well beyond their own kids.
Is there an average tuition?
That's hard to do because regionally, you know, well, I was in Fort Worth, so your high school was maybe 15,000 for the high school. If you go to rural areas, you know, it's going to vary a lot.
So they're really.
I was going to say the education savings accounts that are now being passed in some 13 states is going to change the game dramatically. And that's
How?
where, well, if you, for example, in Florida, every family has $8,500 credit for every one of their children. So we have classical Christian schools that is covering 95% of the cost to educate. So those are state dollars paying for private classical Christian schools. So yes, a lot of our schools are, you know, wondering about what the long-term viability of that is and whether there are risks to what the state will dictate that they do. But for now, it creates a tremendous opportunity for them to have a revolving revenue stream that never existed before and open access to families who would have never considered because they don't have the financial means to do so.
And so they're growing.
Yes, exponentially growing. It's been
And becoming dependent on the government.
Well, so here's what most schools have done. Every one of them have created a way for them to transition back. If the state ever decided to start dictating any kind of curricular choices or admissions requirements, they have a mechanism to transition back because they're not going to do that. And most of these private schools were very much in the policy formation side of it before these ESA laws were passed. And the reason they went in through giving that money to the parents, and then parents choose the school, is to bypass this state intrusion. I'm not saying it can't happen. Don't get me wrong. And there are still policy battles.
Forgive me. It is already happened because the dollars can't go to a school that doesn't have accreditation.
Correct.
So whatever is required for accreditation is government.
Well, we accredit right now. We have started accreditation for that very purpose. So all these schools are going to try to find an accreditor that aligns with their values and with the kind of model that they're advocating for.
Right.
So there's only 2 classical Christian accreditors right now, but still they're able to get that from us. And we have a lot who are interested for that very purpose.
Right. There was a question that I had that didn't get answered, but now it's escaping me. But we'll get back to it if I.
Parents, because you were kind of.
It was.
Okay.
It was about training the parents. How
Yes.
do you you can imply it would be great if all the parents could show up for this event, or it would be good if the parents could do these things with their kids at home, but you can't enforce, right? I mean, so how do your parents figure out that their involvement is paramount?
Yeah. Well, I would say where it starts is the very beginning before they even come into the school, because what we do from prospective parent night on, you know, we have these gatherings and people are deciding if they're coming to the school. You have to be very clear about who you are as a school and what you expect from families and what their role is coming into it. Not even just here's the model of education we're trying to, you know, execute, but what does the relationship between the school and the family look like? How do we handle conflict? What are your responsibilities at home with your child? And very specific, how do you, you know, read to them? Don't gossip in the parking lot. It was pretty extensive that we asked them to sign up for, you know, right from the start. If they weren't willing to do that at the beginning, then sometimes we had to say, you know, this is probably not the best partnership, right? It's not going to work. And so that's the way most of that is conducted is on the front end as best you can. Now, it can get messy. It does. And sometimes you have to part ways, but in most cases that's happening, few and far between.
Right, right. I'm sure it's very rare because there's a whole screening process that happens, and you're trying to, place your bets, and you probably got pretty good at placing the right bets. And I'm sure it seems to me that if you had sort of the exemplary family, you would highlight their behavior to encourage other people to, emulate that kind of a thing.
Right.
And then you have your shining pupils also. And so you can have those role models for the younger kids. Were you K through 12?
We were.
Yeah. Do you think that young boys should be in school in kindergarten and first grade and second grade?
In school, excuse me, in school, like regular hours kind of thing?
Yes. And then clarify if that's not the kind of school that you ran.
No, it was. They were in 4 days a week. And Fridays, it's still that way. They were not there in K-2. So we started that way back from when the school started to have more time at home. And I would say over time, we got a lot better at varying the school day. That wasn't all, sitting still in your seat all day as a kindergartner. That's, not conducive to developmentally where they are. So, but yeah, so I think, making sure that the delivery of the education is appropriate to the developmental stages that kids are in is something the classical Christian movement has done quite well.
Do you, in the classical Christian movement, say that you're a part of electronics, smartphones?
None.
Where are you on that?
Almost no one of our schools has, everyone has phones or laptops, even very limited usage. When you get to the older grades, you may have those for papers that you're writing in class, or you're doing a senior thesis project, but it's usually very limited.
Very limited electronics. And so there was a story this morning of second grade substitute teacher who, I'm putting it in quotes, accidentally showed the second grade class a pornographic image of a man or a boy, a man or a boy. I never saw the image, but a child remarked, "Mommy, why is that boy in bed with two girls?"
Oh my goodness.
And that was a second grade teacher. And there were apologies, which, forgive me, do nothing to mitigate the damage that has been done. And so, and it's sort of like the porn just jumped onto the screen. Nobody could have seen it coming. It just, just like guns shoot people, the porn just put itself out there. And so when I hear that there are schools that are like, we just don't do electronics, we're just not going to go there. God bless you, because that's the proper approach in my view. And for families who insist that their children have phones so that they can, stay in touch, the pagers and flip phones work for that. And the school has probably some kind of phone system. So that
I think it's gone almost full circle now. Because I think originally when we said no, because we never did it, we have pushback and kids need them, and how are they going to get to me after school? But now I think your average parent, at a classical Christian school or not, are glad to not have them, in the school day, and that it's overtaken the entire culture of the family. And
what's great is school offers parents the out.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do with a phone? You can't use it in class.
Right.
There's no reason to get you a phone right now. It's just not, and so that's their out, so they can avoid the pitfalls of the phone issue right now. Okay. How can classical Christian education contribute to improving or bettering the broader cultural, say, renewal or the strengthening of the family? Or what do you think the sort of the upside is for community values or the future of the nation?
Well, I think it applies in almost every sense. I mean, we could use some wisdom and virtue right now in our culture.
Agreed.
So we just had a few weeks ago, we met in Atlanta with about 30 alumni from classical Christian schools from mid-20s to mid-30s. I mean, just some of the most remarkable young people you could put in a room. Gave me such encouragement and hope. I'm just strongly anchored, in their faith, very articulate and thoughtful in how they engage everything. I mean, we just can't get enough of these kids, out there. So I think the things that make for a great education are the things that make for a great culture. And think about the big ideas, the essential questions, wisdom, the virtues. We need prudence right now. I mean, goodness.
And
Name a
patience.
virtue. Yes. I mean, name a virtue that we're not in desperate need of as a culture. We've even lost the idea of what that means.
Right.
And having a strong, deep understanding of the things that have shaped our civilization and what's made us into who we are as a people, as a country. I mean, all of that has been sort of ripped to shreds, and we're trying to piece it back together. That's why we call it a recovery, because we're trying to put together this little shipwreck, that has become Western civilization, and find those relics and renew them so that we can have a sustainable, flourishing human civilization, because it's not real encouraging in a lot of ways right now. But this gives me tons of hope. It really does. And so many good things happening on this front. Even though it's small, there are reasons to be hopeful.
So I have to ask this. You're familiar with the founders of the nation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Would you say that they were classically educated?
100%. There's a great book on this. It's probably right here over my shoulder. It talks about a Thomas Jefferson education. Then he talks specifically about how he was formed as a founding father, but really all of them, what they took from their own education in Greek and Roman history, the languages, the literature, and put together our nation are inextricably tied to their formation in the classical Christian tradition.
Good answer. I agree with that. Okay. I have 3 questions that I ask every guest.
Mhm.
So first of all, what is your own education background and do you use it today?
I do. I have 3 education degrees. One of those was pretty painful. The other 2 I use every single day. Painful in the sense of not helpful. It was kind of a progressive, approach.
Oh, so some of it you don't use and some of it you do use.
Yes. So I have, over time, looking back on my higher ed education experience, a very different take than I did when I was coming out of it. But I do use it every day. So there's no question about that. It has shaped me in some important ways. And also, I think, as a sort of contrast to what, I'm trying to do now.
Oh, yeah. Very good. What advice would you give your younger self?
I think I would tell my younger self to listen more and be patient. I'm not a very patient person. And I think most of the things that I struggled with as a young adult, I had told to me over and over again, but didn't really internalize and process that very well. So listen more.
Interesting. You know the opposite of patience?
Hastiness.
Anger.
Ah.
Anger is the opposite of patience because when you think of impatience, it's an angry person.
Yeah.
What is the most urgent cultural shift that you see facing us today? The most urgent cultural shift necessary for us today?
Well, I mean,
I know your answer.
I'm biased, but I think the education outcomes that we have seen that are generations in the making have to be, I wouldn't say reversed, but it's going to be generations to fix. But I don't see how that's not the most important. You tell me anything you'd like to see as an outcome for our culture that's good and positive, and it's going to start with education. And so I don't know how that's not number one. I don't think, what's crazy in our culture is, there's all these economic shifts that happen and people get all up in arms and they'll vote, the economy. But where is the outcry? I don't think we've really seen it until recent, maybe since COVID, we have seen a real outcry of this is a disaster. We've got to do something. But
yeah, all those domestic terrorists.
yeah, we put up with a lot of really, really bad education output for
Yes.
decades and decades. Why?
It's too bad because the children are being abused and we are just standing by and like shaking our fist.
Yeah.
To no avail. Eric Cook, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's it for me. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. So remember, speak truth and speak it boldly.
The views and opinions expressed in the Sam Sorbo Show are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of the Herzog Foundation.